All right, welcome to the podcast. This week I want to welcome Sanjib Kalita, head of industry at Fintech Meetup. Sanjib, thanks for joining.
Thank you very much, Matt. Really wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. Why don't you start by maybe describing what the head of industry at Fintech Meetup does? What does that job entail?
Sure, absolutely. So, Fintech Meetup is one of the newest and actually the second largest fintech event. In and we try to get folks from across the fintech ecosystem. So startups, banks, investors, technology providers, and my goal is to try to help engage the event with the industry and get them to the event. So that like our goal is to help move the industry forward in a positive manner.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's great. I want to dig into that maybe a little bit later, but tell me, how did you end up in that position? Maybe describe a bit of your journey to get there.
Sure. Yeah. So I've done all kinds of random things. Like, for example, started my career as a chip designer at Intel and designed a programming language that Intel's still using 30 years later. Then went to a business school and worked at Citibank in the credit card business for 9 years. And then the last 14 years or so, I've been doing startups. So worked on a startup payment platform building technology company called TXVia that we sold to Google. I left Google to help build another conference business called Money 2020, which we also sold. And I was there for about 10 and a half years. And I recently left to join Fintech Meetup. And also the last, 5, 6 years or so, I've been in parallel building my own fintech startup called Guppy, which is a credit bureau built on blockchain technology.
Gotcha. A lot to unpack there, but I definitely
Yeah.
see some through lines in terms of the technology enabling decisions using data. Um, so maybe talk a little bit about that. Like, what do you see as the need in industry right now in terms of using data technology as it relates to credit or credit bureaus, as you mentioned?
Yeah, no, so I think that there's a huge opportunity, and in terms of availability of new types of data, but also it's sort of like that there's always with anything positive, there's also like if you overreach or if you do something in a wrong manner, that it could ultimately harm consumers or the people you're trying to sell products to. So I think that that's a bit of like my own personal what gets the fire in the belly going is like just the opportunity, but like also just making sure that we as an industry don't do anything stupid and
Yeah.
and try to do right by the consumer.
Yeah, and I know you've got a bit of a like personal angle here. Like you've been maybe harmed individually
Yes.
in the credit industry. You want to share that story?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I I used to be at Citibank. I used to help manage one of the largest credit card portfolios in the world. Tens of millions of customers, and I used to experience the pain points of bad data and like how I used to make wrong decisions or bad decisions or lead to bad customer experiences. So it felt the B2B pain points of bad data in the system. But then in April 1st, if we go to April of 2012, April 1st of 2012, I got engaged. And just for your listeners, if you're gonna get engaged, don't get engaged on April Fool's Day because no one believes you. Uh,
Yeah, that's good advice.
but it was true. And on April 2nd, Google acquired the startup I was working on, TXVia, which was great. And then April 13th, I was actually closing on buying my first home, an apartment in Manhattan. It was a co-op, and so they had to pull my credit report. And April 29th was our wedding date because my mom was sick, so we just wanted to get married as quickly as possible. And so when they pulled my credit report, according to the credit report, I was married to a man in California. I had 5 foreclosures, 4 bad auto loans. Obviously all bad data, and so when I say that, doing harm to the customer, like
Yeah.
that's something I really felt, and like I had to, in the midst of that month, I had this surreal process of getting police reports that I am who I am, and it was like really made me think that okay, this system needs to be more consumer friendly. So that's a bit of why we started to build Guppy.
So it sounds like you made it through that okay in the end.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It was, the most important thing was making sure my wife believed me that I was not married to someone in California, and then she did, and which was once again the truth. So, been happily married for a dozen years. Was able to buy the apartment, sold our company to Google, and got married all in the span of a single month, which was way more stressful than needed to be because of that bad credit bureau data.
Yeah, very eventful. So glad it all worked out. But how have you then taken that in terms of turning that into a company idea, like you mentioned with Guppy, the
Yeah.
idea of maybe decentralizing data out of the hands of a large institution like a credit bureau and turning that into something that the consumer has more ownership of.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. So first of all, I think um, and you're creating a system that really, I think philosophically tries to put the consumer in control. And so with blockchain, what we've been able to do is sort of basically put push control to the edges
Hmm.
without sacrificing security. So because without blockchain, you have these black box systems that are supposedly highly secure, and because they're tightly controlled, you can, the idea is that that security is more easier to manage. Um, but for example, with the Equifax hack from 2017, that started in February and was not widely known until August September. So once again, that was a bit of a limitation of a black box system. Additionally, with smart contracts, a lot more control over data, a lot more view, and it's trying to modernize a system that has been essentially quite similar infrastructure for like several decades.
Yeah, I bet the transparency would be much welcome to consumers in this space. Are you seeing regulators take a viewpoint on this at all in terms of use of blockchain or, diversified, decentralized databases in terms of credit decisioning or the use in that kind of capacity?
Yeah, another great question. I think I have so like on one hand, have spoken to some senior regulators or actually former regulators who have said that like, hey, I actually when I was at the XYZ regulator, I thought that I would leave for a company like yours, and so that was actually like very nice to hear in terms of the the ecosystems need. Also, depending on the country, like so, for example, certain regulators may be a little bit more aggressive, whereas other regulatory regimes might be more like if let's just look at the use case. I'd care less about the technology itself.
Hmm.
So that definitely there's a span of responses, but it's also it for me it's a new technology, or and so with any new technology, sometimes there can be a bit of market hesitation.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. With the ownership back to the consumer, I guess that probably helps with some of the data cleanliness or accuracy as well, right? Or do you ever think we'll get to a point where data is like perfectly clean and this isn't an issue, or like by using this advanced technology, maybe we're able to clean up errors faster?
Yeah, it's I think I do think it's that latter. It's by engaging the consumer, I'm hoping for a bit of you know a cleansing of the data, also a bit of more building more uh, you know a stronger belief in what the data
Mm.
says.
Yeah.
And I think there's always going to be some elements of bad data. I think it is that's just the reality of entropy and being part of the universe, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, not definitely not the silver bullet, but I think
Yeah.
it can make hopefully a positive
Yeah,
dent.
that's I think you're right. And then we talked before a bit about, the kind of bad data leads to bad decisions or the garbage in, garbage out kind of
Yeah.
philosophy. Do you think that also then translates through into, AI or ML type models, that tend to be viewed as black boxy as well? Like, is it are we able to translate that data into the decision, or if someone wants to dispute a decision, they're able to find the data elements and maybe have more interaction with that process through this?
Yeah, I think that it's having that interaction, the customer interaction with that process, I think is important. And like just as an example, I was reading an article about like, for example, like healthcare data
Yeah,
being used, and and so a lot of times, like, if we're in a doctor's office, we're feeling physically ill, we're not feeling great, or maybe we just want to get this problem solved as quickly as possible. So we have a series of forms that we fill out, and we're like, oh, you want to share this? Sure. Share this? Yeah, why not? Like, if it gets me in and out quicker, I'll do it. And then later on, like this article talked about like how, there have been cases of, uh, some type of marketing, or, or some type of customer messaging that was tied to some of that data that was shared.
yeah,
So like, I think even if you get the customer's permission in order to pull in the data, like, you don't necessarily even want to have the outflow to be like a, laissez-faire, like, let everyone at it. I think if you're able to control it on the outflow as well, the consumer having the awareness of that, I do think that that's important. It can be overhead, but like, depending on the type of data, you might, I really don't want people to know what kind of health issues I might have had in the past.
yeah. I think the healthcare is a good analogy. I think about that too. Every time I go to a different doctor or have an appointment, you fill out all of this paperwork. You feel like you've got to relive your family history for generations to try to give them the information they need. Where if I was in more control of that data, can facilitate who had access to that data for what purposes, I might be willing to share that, speed things up, have a more complete record versus I'm sure I'm not entering that form the same way every time, and would be
Yes.
willing to share that to healthcare providers for treating me versus for marketing purposes, like you mentioned. So the
Yeah.
alignment of data to purpose probably is a key there.
It is, and I think that that purpose is. I mean, I think the similarities with both financial services and with healthcare, it's like, it tends to be in a very, very important time in life, or very
Yeah,
very critical. And if you drop the ball, or you lose trust, it I think it really does get to the heart of, the core value proposition that you're trying to deliver to that consumer.
yeah, I totally agree. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit and go back to the idea of conferences because we had talked about that before as well as a way to exchange or share ideas or stay relevant. Tell me a little bit about like what you're seeing in Fintech Meetup today or in your
Yeah.
past in terms of what do people expect out of conferences in a post-COVID world? What's the benefit there to them?
Sure. Yeah. So like, if I, even go back like about 11 years to when I, worked on Money 2020. I was new to the industry. I sort of unknowingly believed that, that like speaking and content was like the main value proposition, sort of that education. And then like, after a couple of years, like, what I even, through the very first one, like, if there was like a startup that was doing an interesting payment solution, and there was a bank looking for an interesting payment solution, I try to match them up. If there were investors looking for interesting startups, and vice versa, I would try to match them up. And so, and then, like, when after the event, I would get emails from both the banker and the startup, or both the investor and the company, like, hey, thank you, this is very important and helpful. And so then I became, I got to realize that, and that, some of the connections that you can make at an event are the prime value proposition.
Yeah,
And then you sort of, as Money 22 grew, it was like a little bit of like, because there's so many people, uh, you hope, you're hoping a bit of serendipity, like
yeah,
you're in the same room, you hope to meet. And then Fintech Meetup basically was started during the pandemic, when there were no live events, and you could use digital matching technology to do like basically virtual meetings, very quickly. And then once we could meet again too, they launched they had their first live event last year, and I attended as my startup, and I was like, I had 21 meetings, with a few investors, few potential partners, few potential customers, few potential employees, and I was like, this is really neat. And I just sort of saw it as like, okay, this is a better use of my time. And so basically, yeah, I like when the opportunity came, I was like, oh, I'd love to, just from it, like going back to what you said, as far as like having a technology mindset, I was like, this is an interesting application of technology to solve problems and to make experiences more better.
Yeah, I like that. And it sounds like these events can almost be like accelerated incubators or a way to get through a lot of different ideas, different partners, like you mentioned, all coming together in a single place around a certain idea or topic. You know, especially even
Yeah,
with the data available today, like still being in person seems to really facilitate that.
it does. And like I've heard so many startups that have come to me after an event and said, hey, I basically built my company at your last event. I met with several investors, I met with several partners, and we got things going. And so you're absolutely right. Like I think the accelerator comment is actually spot
Yeah,
on.
yeah. And so are you finding people find more benefit in like the one-to-one matchups versus sitting in sessions or the kind of keynote speakers, or do you think each of those really has its place in kind of a
I
conference?
each of them does have its place, but it's also like I think when you have one-to-one conversations, you can say things that you wouldn't want to say very broadly to like thousands of people. Also, you can like if I'm trying to explain mobile payments to a banker versus a retailer versus a even my parents, it's very different conversations, even though you're saying the same thing. And so it's sort of like if I tried to talk about mobile payments to a retailer like I do to my parents, the retailer would be like, I don't need this. I'm well beyond this.
Yeah.
Whereas vice versa, I think if I tried to talk to my parents as I do a retailer, they'd be like, okay, I don't understand this. This isn't for me. This is for someone who's much beyond. And when in reality, it can work for both. So like, I think that having the right conversation makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that's true. You're probably also more willing to share, maybe not getting into trade secrets, but a little more on like the how things work or into the nitty-gritty of kind of the
Yeah.
complex problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's partially, like if it's very broad, like when you might want to protect something that is truly secretive, but also you also might think that I'm going to put people to sleep if I talk at this level of depth, when in fact, like if a lot of times that level of depth might be the key to making the decision in your favor.
Yeah, that's a good point. Are you seeing any themes in terms of the types of startups that are coming out now, participating in Fintech Meetup? Like what kind of problems are they trying to solve or technologies they're using?
I mean, I think it's that there's I mean the good and the bad is like that there's still a lot of opportunity in improving financial services, and and I think that part of it is like, I see a lot more, because we've sort of been through a bit of a slowdown. I think it forces startups to be more focused with how they communicate themselves. It forces them to be more tight in terms of their value proposition. It also, I like this. Like I think in some cases, there might have been a bit of arrogance, like a couple of years ago. So, and I think it's good to have, your feet on the ground when you're trying to build something like this.
Yeah, that's true. And I think we're starting to see, people much more open to partnerships with technology companies. I think, like you said, maybe breaking down the arrogance a bit or understanding that like not every company can solve every problem for every person. So seeing who's out there finding a really niche solution to something they're struggling with. Like, are you seeing more partnership opportunities across traditional financial services providers and newer entrants, or how's that?
Yeah, I think you're seeing more partnerships, like even at with some huge companies, like for example, like the partnership with like Adyen and Klarna for like
Hmm.
issuing, like right, it's that a couple of years ago, neither of them, each of them would be in their own universes, but now like you're trying to see like, okay, where is the overlap,
Hmm.
and even with like for example, like banks and traditional issuers, and let's say like a data startup, or there's more of a mutual understanding of like, okay, what is our overlap, what are we both trying to drive towards, and how can we get to that
Yeah,
solution faster.
yeah, yeah. Great. Um, well, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Is there anything you think I missed that you think people should know about that you've seen or want to let people know about?
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess like definitely, if you can make it to Vegas for Fintech Meetup in this year, that I would definitely urge you to join. And if you're there, definitely look me up. I would love, I love meeting people and hearing people, and so yeah, that's probably my closing statement.
Awesome. Well, I know, I've definitely been to a lot of conferences. I find a lot of value in, like you said, the one-to-one, hearing some of the sessions and what's going on. Are there other things outside of conferences, like maybe someone you follow closely from a thought leadership perspective, another podcast that you follow? Like, how do you stay in the loop of what's happening as this space changes day by day? Like, maybe give us a couple sources to help us stay informed, like you.
Yeah, so I think that I always like looking at thought from outside of my industry, primary industry. So like, so for example, when I was a chip designer, I used to like looking at business papers or
Hmm.
business periodicals. But now that I'm in business, I like looking at technology periodicals. Like, so things like MIT Technology Review, or Wired, or those types of things that maybe get into a little bit more. Not I'm not necessarily reading like IEEE papers now anymore, but maybe a step, maybe more accessible than that. But that's probably one source. Another source is like just just understanding what people are listening to
Hmm.
music wise, media wise. I think that also helps me just keep up to date, so I don't feel like an old man, too prematurely.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I could definitely talk about music for some time. That's probably for another podcast. I don't know if that's totally this audience, so maybe we can catch up on that on offline.
That would be great.
Well, it was great again. Thanks, Sanjeev, for the time. Hope to catch you in person soon, and thanks again.
Thank you very much, Matt.